Good evening. Apologies for a lovely technical fun stuff. Good evening. This is the world. Peter and Adam. Has his camera on, fixed, always
Hello,
fun.
you get to see me in my sixth form attire.
And we'll get straight forward to the big news of the day, which is really the biggest news maybe of the week outside of Joe Biden. That is number 10 internal drama with Lee Cain and Dominic Cummings out. But Adam, explain a bit what has gone on.
Okay, so of course, as with most political drama inside of Downing Street, we have very little information on if something actually happened. We really rely upon aides and hearsay or whatever. But the broad gist is, yes, Dominic Cummings, the mastermind behind Vote Leave's win in 2016, all the way up to 2019 and the Conservatives' resounding majority there, and a variety of other lovely issues in campaigning, and also had a very, controversial trip up to Barnard Castle, which you may know of. But the gist here, which I'm going to be reading directly from the Financial Times, who are great on this stuff, but they say that Mr. Johnson held a 45-minute meeting with Mr. Cummings and Mr. Cain on Friday to discuss their general behaviour this week, according to individuals with knowledge of the conversation. In tense exchanges, Mr. Johnson accused his aides of briefing against him and his partner, Carrie Symonds, and criticised them for destabilising the government in the midst of tense Brexit negotiations. Mr. Johnson showed the aides text messages that had been forwarded to Ms. Symonds, who opposed Mr. Cain's appointment as Chief of Staff, to show they had briefed against her. He told them to get out and never return. So yeah, very quite striking language being there that we have some glimpse of access into. But yes, Dominic Cummings is going. That's quite tense. But do you want to go a bit specific on the build up to this, who Mr. Cain is and that kind of thing, Peter?
So yeah, Lee Cain, or some fellow British politicals like to mention, who dressed as a chicken outfit once for the Daily Mirror a decade ago and mocked former Prime Minister David Cameron, was the director of communications in Number 10, a very close ally of one Dominic Cummings. And there had been tension for some time within Number 10 about the future. Dominic Cummings' relationship had started to dwindle, especially with the backbench of the Conservative Party, over months of prolonged, anger over the Durham trip during lockdown, and issues with fellow ministers, such as the former now Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sajid Javid, who resigned from the cabinet back in February. That feels like a million years ago now, over Mr. Cummings' interference in cabinet decisions and wanting his advisors to run to Treasury, which Javid refused and resigned. Now, to the point of this week, now there had been rumors this in the papers for some months and some time now that there was shakeup coming in Number 10. Just earlier this week, Boris' longtime confidant, Edward Lister, who has been his advisor since he was mayor of London, announced that he was leaving beginning of next year, and now we have this. In this case, it seems Mr. Cain and Dominic Cummings grew the ire of Carrie Symonds, who is the spouse of the Prime Minister, and should be noted, unlike most spouses of Prime Ministers, actually does come from a political background. She was the director of communications at Conservative Central Office for some time, and she didn't like Mr. Cain and had some grudges against Mr. Cummings, and basically started pushing internally for them to be pushed out, in a sense. And this is how we've had the last week of rumored reports from the papers and the BBC about people inside Number 10, who's on whose side, and this all culminated yesterday with the first resignation of Lee Cain, who was supposed to become the new Downing Street Chief of Staff, and now today with Dominic Cummings. And it's rumored, of course, as Adam mentioned in the FT, that there was that tense meeting, and that's where Mr. Johnson effectively sacked the two of them. And of course, it hasn't taken long for the Cummings squad in number 10 to retaliate back with their own comments. I will quote directly what is been said by the Daily Telegraph. Quote, that Mrs. Carrie Simmons is called that she was called Princess Nut Nuts because she is of high maintenance and acts regularly nuts, which is to say what their views of Mrs. Simmons are, which is rather interesting coming at a time when arguably the government's in its weakest state, polling and really morally wise, for some in its new term.
That was so eloquently put. Thank you so much for that very good briefing. So, yeah, there's a lot to take from this. And I think the main one is it comes from Boris Johnson now onwards wanting to shake up his image. He wants to make a new Boris Johnson. And for people who have followed Boris Johnson throughout his political career, you will know this is something he does a lot. Take a look at his mayoral campaign, where he presented himself as this very liberal character who was, making fun of Donald Trump, and then take it to his actual premiership. Very different styles, and that's the sort of thing they're going to be, what they want to go towards. The Times has reported that Boris Johnson plans to reset his premiership with an end to the culture wars and a focus on a green agenda, a less dogmatic approach to Scotland, focus on women's issues, and a variety of other more, Cameronite ideas, if you were. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be a very interesting way. First of all, see if it plays out with the electorate. If this is true, of course, that they do decide to try and restyle how the Conservative Party will be working for the next 3 years onwards, then definitely we'll see how the electorate responds. It'll be interesting to see how that works practically in governance. If that leads to a slight resurgence in the Brexit Party, as the Conservatives are no longer the place of culture wars, that kind of thing. So yeah, what are your takes on it, Peter?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to see the rumored shift again. Now we seem to be getting One Nation Boris returning now, not the liberal Boris. And you are right. Yeah, Boris does this all the time. When in his career, if it's any guidance, he bounces around the ideologic perspectives. Of course, it also is rumored, of course, that there's a cabinet reshuffle coming in February, and already one rumored report is that one Michael Gove could be sent to health, and that one Matt Hancock could be sent to education. Already rumors of reshuffling coming around, and even more dramatic news. The former Chancellor Sajid Javid, as mentioned earlier, is now in the running to possibly become the next Downing Street Chief of Staff, as, again, noted, Carrie Simmons, being in her political background, used to work for Sajid Javid. It is rumored that she wants him in number 10 sphere. So already fun little games occurring for the future.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting aspect, because I feel like a lot of the reporting around this issue is try to frame Carrie Simmons in the wrong light, as if she's telling Boris these things at a whim and he's just going along. She does have that seasoned political expertise from her own past, which is quite unique, I think, especially from a prime minister's wife in the UK. But another note I think we should talk about is going all the way back to that mentioned trip up to Durham, in which the government saw its real first major scandal that hurt people's trust in their response to the coronavirus, and really saw their shift from polling 20 points ahead of the Labour Party to where they are now, where it's basically a toss-up between the two. So let's look back at that. What do you think of that, scandal? And do you think it was right for what Downing Street did to stick by Dominic Cummings and keep him on for the next few months, only for him to go at this stage? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, where we are now, with the benefit of hindsight, probably would have just made more sense to, just let him go in June, and just if this was all building up. I mean, they wasted a lot of political capital defending him, trying to say nothing had occurred, and tried to argue, he was just helping his child who had special needs, which is true, but to be fair. But it didn't really resonate with the public. I mean, if it had been me personally having to give Boris advice, I would have said that Cummings should have taken a little bit of a break from working in Downing Street.
Yeah, it is quite funny looking back on it now, because it was a time where the British public basically sat at home all day because that's what they had to do to combat the coronavirus, and how excited people got over the idea of a press conference where he'd be answering questions directly from journalists. That was quite a unique time. I think it was the first ever time that sort of thing had ever happened, especially because Downing Street staff usually stay behind the scenes. So the history of Dominic Cummings is definitely going to be one that scholars will look at, because there is a lot of success there, especially with Vote Leave and Brexit referendum, and especially the 2019 general election campaign. But yeah, just the exciting political history that formed for most of us who were bored at home, and the only semblance of excitement for the day was the daily press conference. So yeah, he's will not be missed by some, will be missed by others.
Of course, he's a love-hate figure
exactly.
in British politics. I mean, even his own Conservative Party, who many of its MPs try to, make a very good point of telling people he's not a member of the party.
A libertarian a lot.
Yeah, libertarian blog. Very fun blog, by the way, if you ever want to have fun reading about government policies. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see the next chief of staff, whether it's Sajid Javid or Nikki Della Costa, who's rumored to be the other person. What did they go? Did they go with the more legislative chief of staff? Or did they go for the first time ever an MP being the chief of staff?
Yeah, and this is the crucial thing, how do the public respond? Do they go, fantastic, he's gone, Boris got rid of him? Or do they see it as a negative thing, where they're like, well, why did he stay on for so long? That'll be interesting to see in the future. But I think if that's all you have to say on the topic, then we can move on. Yes, we can move on to President-elect Joe Biden, and the very important thing for a president-elect, which is their phone calls with foreign leaders. They get their congratulations, but there's also the one-to-one time where they get to talk about policy aims, what they hope to do in the future, and some very interesting phone calls that President-elect Biden has made. For example, the first expected phone call was, I believe, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, and then his second was Boris Johnson, of course, Prime Minister of the UK, and some other interesting figures, such as Scott Morrison, President Moon of South Korea. You also have Pope Francis, quite a lot of different people from around the world. What are your opinions on who he's chosen to make his first phone calls with, and what it may mean for a Biden administration?
I mean, they're not surprising in the historic context. I mean, calling Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, being the U.S.'s neighbor, isn't surprising. I think what maybe surprised a lot of people was that it was actually Boris, not Merkel or Macron, getting the first phone call from Europe, which is interesting to say the least, because there's been the widespread expectation that Biden will have much more of a deeper relationship with Merkel and Macron. So maybe we're possibly seeing the seeds of maybe Biden's actually going to be much more pragmatic with Europe. Maybe he sees a much more balanced approach. He can keep Boris close, but also keep the other European countries in line. Of course, that's just a thought. Could be wrong. But I think, overall, the phone calls seem normal. I mean, seems the broad consensus of most world leaders is to accept that Joe Biden has won. Obviously, the networks have called it here. For the most part, barring a change of events, it's more than likely Joe Biden will be the president come January 20th. But yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, it is, of course, funny to see that the president of Mexico, I believe, is one of the few world leaders not to congratulate Trump. Milo, who knows? Maybe populism runs, in the family. Congratulate.
That's what I was going to say. That's definitely an interesting element to look at, primarily because you would have thought that U.S. relations between under President Trump would have been exactly the best with Mexico. But yeah, there's that development there. I do think a specifically interesting one definitely is the phone call with President Moon in South Korea. Obviously, it's the traditional ally of the United States in the Pacific. But just seeing Biden reaffirm this idea of a trifecta against both China and North Korea, that being of South Korea, the United States, and Japan, to try and diffuse any form of or potential of a nuclear conflict in the region. So how that plays out will definitely be very interesting. And I think just broadly, it's interesting to see that the world hasn't really taken to Donald Trump's message of this being a fraudulent election. One interesting element I did want to look at is I was reading about the I guess steps by the Trump administration to sort of cut off any means of transition that a president-elect would traditionally have when moving over from into the office of the presidency. One such example is having select individuals go into the State Department or the Pentagon and various other places, so they get a lay of the land, a real idea of how it works and the main issues. And another thing, the intelligence and information on foreign affairs is another key thing that's being denied to the Biden campaign. And the reason this is so important is just going back to, I believe it was the 9/11 report, which stated that one of the big things was that George Bush's NSA, was it NSA? Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it was now. Some form of National Security Council, I believe, wasn't able to properly establish itself. I believe it took them about 6 months because of the sort of aggressive nature of Bill Clinton and transitioning to there. So yeah, that will definitely be interesting to see if that does have any actual effect in when 2021, when Biden takes over. But what are your thoughts on first of all, maybe the countries that aren't congratulating, or the fact that most countries aren't playing into President Trump's idea of fraud, and also the denial of information for Biden's team?
Yeah, I mean, not surprised. I think most countries see the results, and I think most have just followed standard diplomatic procedure. Is it looks very certain that President-elect Biden will be a thing, and they're going out of their way to congratulate him on the win. I think on the transition thing, I sort of, in Trump's mind, he still thinks he's been rigged, robbed. So I think whether it's fair or not, the transition has been put on hold. Now, I do think with the intelligence, the daily briefing, we've already started seeing some pushback on the Hill from Republicans, basically saying, sure, we may agree with the president's assessment, this election needs to be reviewed for the time being, but that Mr. Biden, President-elect Biden, should have the right to get those intelligence information should he become president. Obviously, he probably will, but yeah, I think not ideal. I mean, and it's sort of this isn't go back in time. It's sort of not very great that the standard from 2000 that was created in a sense about contested elections seems to be returning and slowing down the process. I mean, look, there are valid questions to be made, about whether states acted within their normal procedures for an election, but as all the data currently shows, there's really no way that the president, even if he's successful in getting things thrown out, would make up the margins in states. So yeah, I just think it'd be ideal for the country that the transition began, in a sense.
Well, that's the key thing about the 2000, because of the contested nature of it. It meant that it took so long before it was really decided, and even then, you're looking at a situation where it is so much closer than it is today that it's not really a comparable situation. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how that develops. And again, if there's going to be any real crisis that spawns out of them not having access to the daily briefing. But yeah, I think it will be interesting again to see who. Sorry.
Oh no, I just wanted to.
I was.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. I apologize.
I was going to say who else Joe Biden decides to call, where his priorities will be placed, and when will the Middle East be called as well? When will Middle Eastern leaders have their chance to have a conversation with the president, but allow a president-elect? So yeah, please go ahead. And
yeah, no, I think those are. I think it'll be interesting. He hasn't made the call yet to the Prime Minister of Japan. That's going to be a very interesting phone call. The Middle East, especially, there's a lot of, it seems, worry in that part of the world that Biden may very much, be a problem for a lot of their opinions, the progress that has been made. Of course, that's an opinionated view of certain individuals. I know you have stated this numerous times, your views on that, so fine. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how his relation to the Arab world is. There's no secret of the fact that, he's probably not going to have the greatest relation. He's not historically had a great relationship with Bibi Netanyahu, and he did criticize Mohammed bin Salman for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi 2 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see where that balance goes. And I think another interesting phone call will be with Prime Minister Modi of India. Modi endorsed Trump very vocally, all but appeared in the campaign rally for him in Houston. So it'll be interesting in that relationship. Just one quick tip. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, interesting thing about Modi is that he was obviously a very key figure for Trump's movement. Again, quite a right-wing populist, but was one of the first to tweet out his congratulations for President-elect Biden, which was very, very interesting to see. Same with another controversial figure, which another figure that benefited quite well under Trump was Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan. And she got quite a bit of a backlash, or at least I saw underneath the comments of her tweets, who knows how representative that is, for congratulating President-elect Joe Biden. But yeah, that's two key figures.
Viktor Orban even congratulating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but anyway, continue on your point.
Yeah. No, just my last point is on the point about 2000. When the election was, finally called, the Bush team only had, I think, 2 or 3 weeks to get, people in for nominations for the Senate and staff roles because of the nature. And then within those 3 weeks, they'd be in the White House having to make decisions. So ideally, if this is resolved very soon, it'd be very helpful for the country that the Biden transition team will be able to get into place because they will be dealing with a very, dangerous world, COVID and other issues on January 20th. As it's always been said by everyone who's worked in the White House, just because you're inaugurated on the 20th doesn't mean problems will not arise on that same day.
Exactly, yeah. And just a final point is it sort of undermines a lot of the State Department's key messaging when a contested election comes in a sort of conflict-ridden region of the world. For example, in Tanzania recently, where they talk of voter fraud, but more specifically in other countries where they talk about accepting the reality of the results and allowing a smooth transition of power and that kind of thing. It just sort of provides a bit of a backlash for dictators to use and sort of undermines their key message for diplomats who ultimately don't have any say in the whole political side of what's going on rhetorically. But yeah, it sort of undermines that message there, but it doesn't play too much into it, but it's just an aesthetic thing, really. But yeah, I think that's all. And of course, as it goes on, the whole US election saga, we'll make sure to talk about how Joe Biden will be planning, if any key speeches come out of what he wants to do. In fact, do you want to quickly talk about maybe some of the foreign policy things that he stated he wanted to do on day one via executive orders, such as rejoining Paris?
The Iran, yes. He wants to rejoin the Paris Agreement and the Iran nuclear agreement as well.
Another one was rejoining the WHO.
Yes.
So, just broad organizations that were pulled out of them, but really just shows that the US are trying to go for that whole internationalist approach to their foreign policy. But I think that is all. Yes.
And moving on foreign issues, move on to a very big development this week. Another one is the Azerbaijan-Armenia ceasefire. Actually, this time this one actually counts. It's not the other few ones that have disappeared, it seems, within a matter of hours or days. First thoughts, Adam, on this arrangement that was struck.
Yep. So this is the real closest thing we've seen in a very long time for a peace deal between the two countries, and comes after 6 weeks of fighting and conflict. So it was brokered by Russia, and signed by the leaders of the two countries. Under the peace deal, Azerbaijan will get to hold onto the contested area of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is this area which has been owned or technically owned by Azerbaijan, but has been administered by the Armenian majority in the region. Armenia has also agreed to withdraw from adjacent areas over the next few weeks around the region to ensure there can be no pushback, that kind of thing. Furthermore, Russia has stated it will put roughly 2,000 Russian forces onto the front lines to act as peacekeepers, and Turkey has stated they will also be taking a part in the peacekeeping process because they've been a major player in this conflict. So the real broadest way of looking at this, and even down to the specifics, this is a very, very big win for Azerbaijan and Turkey, and a huge loss for Armenia and sort of for Russia, because it's an area of conflict that they've staked some form of interest in. Obviously, it was a bit different because they had support for both sides. But yes, just a fascinating conflict. Obviously, as I stated, because Azerbaijan was able to ultimately win this conflict with the backing of Turkish weapons and mercenaries, or allegedly mercenaries, and foreign fighters from Syria. Just to talk about the reactions, there has been joy and celebrations on the streets in Azerbaijan, and in Armenia on the day where it was announced, there was a very swift conflict that evolved that has sort of seemed to die down now, which saw protesters storm government buildings in the country's parliament, beat up the speaker of the parliament, and ransack the Prime Minister's office of like perfumes and other such exciting items they hide in there. But yeah, just again, sort of similar to Kyrgyzstan earlier, where obviously it's a different kind of conflict, but protesters do love storming parliaments across the world. But yes, just to talk about quickly the international consequence of this. The US and the EU were not involved at all in this negotiation. Traditionally, around the Caucasus, or at least around the Black Sea, you'd have some form of involvement, especially from the EU, but they've been completely sidelined at this. The United States just hasn't seemed to really put forward an interest in the conflict, or at least in a way that means they would have a seat at the table. Really has been a bilateral, negotiation between Turkey and Russia. And again, is only heightening something we've been talking about a lot on the World Tonight, which is that Turkey is really growing as a regional power and acting definitely as a wild card in the region. But yeah, that's the broad assessment of this peace deal. It will be interesting to see how a Russian-Turkish, line of conflict is administered, and how conflict can be avoided. And how Armenia will develop from this loss.
Very eloquently put, per usual, from Adam. But yeah, I think I share the same view. I mean, for Azerbaijan, this is a fantastic agreement. It gets back its territory it's long wanted. I mean, I know this might be very premature to say, but they are very much the victors of this current saga. They've gotten their territory back, and in Armenia's case, they've lost the territory and their client state in this sense. And also the other big thing as mentioned is the current Armenian government is now under a lot of pressure domestically, because having lost this, a lot of voters are angry. And obviously, one would assume so, that the government, was lying about its capacity, and it win. So it'll be interesting to see if in the next few months or weeks, do we see this current government in Armenia collapse? Is there an election? Is there someone else appointed? Because obviously the voters, they're not very happy with losing this war. Meanwhile, in Azerbaijan, which is run by what would be described as basically a dictatorship, the dictatorship will have even more PR to celebrate them winning. On the point of the diplomacy end, this is a big win for Russia, as it proved that it still has a very big path and power structure in the Caucasus, and Turkey itself, for being on the winning side. Not on the winning side, but for Turkey in a sense, it's a bit of a loss because they supported, I believe, Armenia
No, Turkey supported, fully backed Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan. Apologies, folks. I have crow for that, so apologies. Yes, Turkey is another big winner for supporting the victor. I had it right the first time, and I corrected myself. Yes, they're a big winner in this process because now Turkey will have a new clientele that is stronger in their position in the region. And yeah, I mean, the big loser is Armenia and their supporters. And yeah, and we've seen another loser was the EU not really getting involved in this. The American agreement that was signed and broken within a week didn't really last.
Yeah, Chuck Schumer was a big supporter of the Armenians, being the Senate minority leader. And again, it just wasn't able to translate into anything substantial, primarily just because the United States is focused on other issues at the moment. And without that real executive power that the president really holds into negotiations, diplomats alone weren't able to really develop anything in the region. I think just my final point here is that where does this go in the future? And it primarily does represent, quite a minor Russian loss, really, because this is the first conflict they've staked an interest in, and they really attempted to try and keep both sides happy. And they do have very strong relations with both Azerbaijan and Armenia, but more so with Armenia. Yeah, this is the first real proxy conflict that they've seen any form of major loss in. I say major loss; it is still quite minor, but it does still represent something.
It's a political disaster.
I mean, you have to also remember that Turkey does not like Russia at all.
No.
There was, murmuring that because of them wanting to buy weapons from Russia, that it represented something. But given how they've been taking the conflict in Syria and especially Libya, where they're essentially, fighting one another. Yeah, this is not great for Russia in this sense because Azerbaijan will be bolstered. Azerbaijan is a fanatical ally of Turkey. But yeah, this is just the reality of the conflict now and the Caucasus.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I think another interesting point, especially with Erdogan, this will probably embolden him, and it will be interesting to see how much now with this emboldening him now. Does he try to become much more powerful, not just in the Caucasus, but in the Middle East? It's been rumored for some time now that, he wants to be the one in charge. And he has had a lot of anger that the Saudis, for example, MBS and Egypt, are basically seen as right now who to call in the Middle East. He wants to be him to be the first one to be called. So it'll be interesting to see how that relationship works. And as you mentioned, he's anti-Russia, still even with, this agreement. And it's quite interesting to see that Turkey, in a sense, is moving anti-Americanish and anti-Russia at the same time. But it shows that really Erdogan's trying to pursue his own independent policy. Whether it works or not remains to be seen. Outside this,
the way that's the way you have to look at it. Antagonizing Russia by sending foreign fighters to help Azerbaijan, all the way to maritime conflicts with Greece and Egypt. So yeah, they're definitely not, trying to play to any side really. No. But it's fascinating to watch how it develops. Primarily because Turkey is such, it's an untested power really, beyond what they're currently doing, which is mainly sad.
Well, I think we've lost Adam's screen for a moment.
Mercenaries. Oh, I'm back. I have no idea what happened. Where did I cut off?
You were cutting off, I believe, on the mercenaries part.
Okay. So that's basically where Turkey's been projecting their power. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly. The mercenaries. We saw this in Syria, and we've seen this in Libya, and we may very well see this in the next regional skirmish that comes out.
Yeah, Libya. I was just going to say Libya is the perfect example where you have Russian mercenaries fighting Turkish-backed foreign fighters. So again, this is just echoing this wider conflict. Yeah.
Yes. So now moving on from the ceasefire, we move to Hong Kong, where its legislative council, the pro-democracy wing of the council, en masse resigned this week. And Adam, being from Asia Lex, can tell us a bit about the backstory here, besides what we've already discussed here, and what Asia Lex has written about this.
Yep. So, as you stated, the entire caucus of the pro-democracy camp in the legislature of Hong Kong, which represents 19 out of 70 overall seats, has resigned after 4 of their members were disqualified with immediate effect without court oversight. Now, the reason they were disqualified is because of a piece of legislation which was brought about by the Chinese parliament. In which they passed a measure which meant that anyone on the Legislative Council of Hong Kong who supports independence, refuses Beijing's sovereignty over Hong Kong, or seeks help from foreign countries or foreign forces that try to interfere in the affairs of the region can be instantly disqualified. No court oversight needed. It's a straight-up ban for them to go. Now, prior to this measure being introduced, the pro-democracy camp stated that if any of their members were disqualified, then they would all resign en masse. And that is exactly what has happened. And this is important for a number of reasons. The national security law, which I believe was one of the first things we actually talked about on The World Tonight, is a piece of legislation brought about by the Chinese legislature onto Hong Kong, which makes any real anti-government messaging impossible. Because of how broad it is in its definition, it means that people can be arrested or can be silenced for anything that is seen as anti-Beijing or anti-government. And the Legislative Council was the only real and legal way for the pro-democracy camp to get their voice out there and have it be heard. Ultimately, as we can see now, Beijing has decided to entirely close this avenue of any, raising support off, and it is now left with effectively no opposition at all. Fascinatingly, Carrie Lam, who is the chief executive of Hong Kong, stated that there was nothing to, and I quote, there is nothing to be ashamed of in facing a legislative council without an opposition. We are more excited when bills are passed more efficiently. So as we can see there, respecting democracy is her main priority. But the main reason why the pro-democracy camp wanted to go through this measure, partly to show solidarity, also partly to ensure they save their own backs, because they have no real idea how Beijing will try to silence them. But it also represents a new stage in the almost destroyed movement for democracy, in which there is only so much people can do in their own personal capacity to try and fight against authoritarianism. And ultimately, as we've seen now, the popular uprising of, the popular support and movement of people on the streets simply isn't enough to stop Beijing's overwhelming reach. But yeah, that's mainly why they decided to go through this. And finally, what does this mean for the future? The major thing is it just means that the pro-Beijing camp, which governs Hong Kong, will be able to pass legislation entirely without any form of opposition. One of the main things that they're eyeing up is giving Hong Kong voters on the mainland of China, giving voters, Hong Kong residents or who previously lived in Hong Kong, who now live on the mainland of China, giving them voting rights. So, and that has caused some controversy within the island, as this will be a very more pro-Beijing voter. So yeah, it definitely, as I stated, is continuing this destruction of democracy in Hong Kong and the increase of authoritarianism in the city. Definitely leaves a very, dark future for it.
Yes, I think that's as brutally eloquent you can put it as, and I think it's very much the sad decline of Hong Kong, continuing its downspill. This new law basically, is in a sense to shut up the pro-democracy caucus. Carrie Lam, known for her outstanding commitment, as you mentioned, for political rights and human dignity, cheered this announcement, which is to tell, look, they're very much now in a Chinese pockets, the People's Republic of Chinese pockets, and any last fragments that was negotiated on the handover, almost what I believe now 23 years ago, is pretty much gone. I mean, it's the new reality of Hong Kong, and I think we've both mentioned this. Hong Kong has been mentioned in the show, is no longer a independent oddity in China. It is a Chinese region, full stop. Any political independence it has is gone. And I just think this fully confirms that, and that Hong Kong will now be run by what Beijing says, and that any dissent will be clustered. We've already seen people arrested under the new National Security Act just for disagreements with Beijing. So it's a very sad moment to see that Hong Kong, which was once the golden jewel of Asia, has slipped into the shallows of darkness.
I think there was a chance for democracy to try and put down the overwhelming strength of the gerrymandered Legislative Council in September, in which a election was planned, but was ultimately cancelled. Partly because they state was a coronavirus era, but as we've seen from other countries in the region, such as Singapore and South Korea, they were able to effectively hold elections without causing any major spikes in their cases. But yes, there isn't going to be an election until next September, in which I doubt there will be any real chance for the pro-democracy camp to gain anything substantial. But yes, as you state, it's sort of diminished now. It will see itself as like Macau to its, I believe, west, in which there is a very minor pocket of opposition in a pro-democracy camp, but ultimately the support for pro-Beijing parties is overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to move on and talk a bit, if you don't mind, about Kosovo's president, Hashim Thaçi, who has recently resigned over war crimes. Now, Kosovo's president, Hashim Thaçi, who was a guerrilla leader during the country's war for independence from Serbia in the 1990s, and he has resigned to face charges for war crimes and crimes against humanity at a special court based in The Hague. Now, there aren't exact details on what he is being indicted for specifically, but him, along with the Speaker of the Parliament, I believe, and others, they essentially state that he was criminally responsible for nearly 100 murders. So clearly a very serious crime, to which his position was certainly almost upheld because he was able to be president and avoid these charges, which have been placed on him for a while. So he was elected as president of Kosovo in February 2016, and he has had a very interesting history in trying to avoid these allegations and also his previous history as a guerrilla leader. One that I want to briefly talk about, because there isn't much more to talk about on this issue because details haven't really been announced. But he brought down the government of Albin Kurti, who was the former prime minister. I believe it was around August time when this happened.
June.
June, sorry. Anyway, in June time, which he brought him Kurti down because he announced a war on corruption and organized crime, which could have possibly seen Thaçi under the spotlight due to his association with criminal organizations as a guerrilla leader. He brought him down because of the coronavirus. Again, another fascinating example of the coronavirus is being used to have a politician get what they want, but they were able to bring down Kurti's government via some controversy and a motion of no confidence about their response. But yeah, that's just the brief news on that that has been presented. Do you have any thoughts, Peter, or do you want to move
No, I have
on?
a thought. Yeah, I mean, it's a serious indictment. I mean, this is the Kosovo War of Independence against Serbia. It was a very bloody conflict. It should be noted. There are both Serbs and Kosovoans who have been indicted by this by war crimes committed on both sides. I mean, in this current case, the former president, Hashim Thaçi, these are very serious accusations, if collaborated, of killing 100 people as a guerrilla leader. And this is to say he hasn't already had more controversy with his past. I mean, he was already accused of being in narcotics selling because of his group, and now this. Yeah, it's a very serious issue that part of the world still faces with that shadow of the Bosnian wars, the War of Independence in the Kosovo's case. And it's quite interesting in a sense, with Kashi, is that in his term he had tried to be the normalizer in a sense with Serbia and trying to push away at least some remnants of that past. So it's interesting to see, the return of almost the past. But yeah, it's an interesting saga. As you made it, it's basically, he basically sort of admits, yeah, I did kill people, but it was war. Is basically his line.
I would say one of the interesting points about his presidency has been negotiating a deal with Serbia, which would see a land swap between Serbia and Kosovo. Quite annoying, I imagine, because Kosovo's borders are on its flag, so you'd have to change that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other significant element about that is that it would bring back the idea of land swaps to the Balkans. And there is a fantastic video by the Caspian Report, which I 100% recommend watching, which looks at this idea of the ethnic tensions in the region and how bringing back this idea of land swaps between areas that have different ethnic groups could bring about some controversy in the future. But yeah, definitely a very controversial president, not only because of his past, but it will be interesting to see if he is indicted and whoever comes after him, what sort of foreign policy they will try and go for, and do they continue this very pro-American and sort of normalization approach that he has attempted.
Yeah, because Nakshi, I believe, as was it very much the key part of getting the U.S. and a lot of other European countries to recognize Kosovo. It'll be interesting to see what the succession plan is. I mean, the current president, acting president, is the first woman in charge of Kosovo. Is significant, but it'll be interesting to see how whoever fully takes over the new job will react to the Serbs. Since Serbia and Kosovo have in recent years begun to have a bit of a more respectful dialogue and moving on from the shadows that were the wars between the two. So it'll be interesting to see, as you mentioned, what occurs.
Indeed. And I believe that is all for this time. I will just quickly add that you may be wondering why we're not talking about the results in Myanmar. That's primarily due to the fact I can't find the official results because they don't seem to be released yet. And I'm waiting for those to be released first before I talk about anything specific. So just to lead a bit of a tension for you there on if you're really curious about that and my amazing foreign policy takes on the election there. But yeah, I believe that is all for this week before we go on to the loser of the week, everyone's favorite time.
It's always a fun, time, especially with every show can be dark, humorous, and there's always this, segment. That,
it really, forces people to actually listen to the end.
Yes.
So I'll let you go first. What is your loser of the week?
Yeah, so my loser of the week, and we mentioned him last week on this show, he's the current Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, who has been in very controversial hot water for basically trying to rig elections. This is the man who went from a Nobel Prize winner for solving peace to now an African tin pot dictator. What a fall. This man was seen by a lot of international groups as possibly a future leader of Africa who could remove the continent's dark past with coups and terror dictatorships. But it seems he himself is also joining the long list of, failed Africa reformists, which is very sad in the sense that he really was going to be this special thing that was going to help, put the region on a good thing. And it's just another, point that, as they say, African reformists tend to not last very long.
Yeah, there's very interesting elements about that because it does relate to we were talking previously about Tigray on the last week and the conflict brewing there. And to be fair, and a key thing to note is that that conflict is escalating further, and the UN has stated that there may be war crimes being committed in the region.
Also there as well.
You
I
have
forgot to mention
rhetoric.
that.
Yeah, you have rhetoric from army leaders in which they talk about obliterating key targets in the region, which is incredibly important because it borders Eritrea. And the government of Tigray has never been a very big fan of the prime minister because of the peace attempts that have been attempted. Did I say prime minister just then? I think.
Yes,
Yeah. Anyway. Sorry. But anyway, the point is that the conflict between the two has sort of been brewing for a very long time. We talked about it in the past before. That is a great idea for the loser of the week.
Yeah, and just to quickly finish up on the loser my thing, and I'll gladly hand off. And now, with the communications there have been cut off by the Ethiopian military, and in a sense, we don't really know what's going on, and that really is a disturbing thing to not know. I don't want to say this, but it's probably that there are probably, crimes being committed that we probably don't know, and we're only to find out from survivors. Of course, Ahmed is accusing Kiev of massacring his troops, which probably isn't true at all from how this has worked. But yeah, it's really. And I forgot to mention that, and that really was the bread and butter what I was going to make this loser of the week on. So thank you actually for reminding me of that. Always good to have a sidekick. For this, yeah, I mean it's sad to see that he went from someone who a lot of groups really thought was the thing in Africa and getting peace with Eritrea to basically another Tim Pot.
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, it depends how this conflict develops. If this really does hurt his reputation, obviously, besides the fact that in hindsight, that Nobel Peace Prize may have been a bit, I don't know, a bit premature. Of course, they always are. But I think just another thing to talk about is if this conflict is dealt with relatively quickly, it may not hurt his overall idea of being a reformist, because it really does play into the fact that Tigray as a whole has been was the only opposition party in Ethiopia, and besides being a reformist, hasn't really been aligned to looking at democratic reform. It's more economic, social, and that kind of thing. So yeah, who knows if this strikes? If this becomes a very long, drawn-out conflict that stays around for a significant long time and develops into a civil war, then beyond his own, appearance, which has already been damaged by this conflict, yeah, it may turn into actually practical failures there. But I'm going to talk about my loser of the week, and you did mention it before when you mentioned one of the major world leaders who has not congratulated President-elect Joe Biden. And yes, it is President AMLO of Mexico. Now, the reason I wanted to go for loser of the week for this one is because, this week hasn't had a lot of fun, or at least I don't think it has had a lot of fun. But there is something significantly funny, at least to myself, about a left-wing populist and a right-wing populist finding some form of unity about, the main type of wording he uses is interfering in, the domestic affairs of another country by mentioning it. He's going to wait. Particularly hilarious, in my opinion, because of his reaction to the ousting of Evo Morales in Bolivia, in which his first reaction was to, get very involved in their domestic politics. But that is my loser of the week. Particularly, I mean, it could be hypocrite of the week. Who knows how you want to frame that? But that has been all. It's been quite a packed thing.
Yes.
I did just want to quickly say, very quickly, that I've been listening to Pod Save the World, Crooked Media's international politics thing, which has former Obama staffers and Ben Rhodes and other exciting people talk about international politics. And I'd quickly like to say, not to toot my own horn, just a little bit, that, oh boy, did I think I was opinionated on this show. There is some interesting commentary on there. So if any of you out there prefer us over Pod Save the World, you're really got good taste there. But to be honest, I did want to introduce this show today as a as I don't know what was the word, like the B movie version of Pod Save America. But we just need guests. That's what we need now. We need
Yes.
guests.
Yes. Then again, I'll save my comments about Ben Rhodes because some of them are probably not. Yeah, for the best, so shall we put it? I'll only say about Ben Rhodes. I think, in my personal opinion, this is an opinionated statement, folks. One of the worst people to ever work at the White House. But of course, that's my opinion.
I was going to say some of the things he says on the show we have gone into more depth on. So
yeah,
take that as you will. Take that as you will.
But no, I think this is a good show. I mean, look, it's no secret, of course, me and Adam have different political views, but as you see, we can have a civil discussion about these things.
Indeed.
Which is what we need more in the world.
That is indeed, and we will continue as ever to bring you the news that Pod Save the World. That's a different one. Doesn't look at. That's what we try our best with.
Indeed.
That's all for this week.
And before we go, obviously, since our Twitter is suspended, gotta love Twitter algorithms. To watch this show, you can catch us on YouTube. Just subscribe, and you can find any episode you've missed or future ones, and any podcast servicing that you may use. That may, Apple, Spotify, etc. Whatever pleases you to go and listen about the world for about an hour. We're two nerds. It's always fun, to have some, some formal discussions in a very crazy world that we live in. Yes, I think we've reached our allotted time for the night. And as always, I thank you all for watching this show, the loyal viewers. Thank Adam for always being a faithful, great co-host and dealing with my stupidity at times. But I wish you all a happy weekend and see you in 1 week.
Bye.